Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going deep on something pretty relevant, especially if you're thinking about the UPSC exams. We're talking about India's constitution now at 75. But we're not just going to celebrate all the achievements. We're going to tackle something a bit tougher. How does the constitution deal with dissent? And what does that mean for liberty in India?
You know what's really interesting? This article we have from The Hindu frames this idea of dissent, not just as you can disagree, but as a constitutional ethic. Like it's woven into how Indian democracy works.
Constitutional ethic. That sounds kind of heavy. What makes it different from just having the right to, disagree?
It's like the spirit of the law, not just what's written down. A democracy shouldn't just tolerate dissent. It should protect it, encourage it even. Think about it. This ethic, it changes how power works and makes sure all these different voices can be heard, even if they're criticizing the government.
So it's not just that individuals can speak their mind, it's how that right shapes the whole system.
Exactly. Dissent's vital for a democracy to be healthy.
To see how this plays out in real life, the article takes us back to a big court case from 1950, A.K. Gopalan versus the state of Madras, just a few years after independence right. What was going on in that case?
It was a huge test for the Constitution. Like, is it really serious about liberty? Gopalan was detained under this Preventive Detention Act, and the majority of the court, they upheld the detention. They had a pretty narrow view of fundamental rights then.
So pretty restrictive.
Yeah.
Limiting individual freedom.
Yeah, but there's this twist. Justice Fazali, he wrote this powerful dissenting opinion. He said you can't have liberty without justice and dignity, and the Constitution should protect those values.
So even though he didn't win the argument at the time, it set the stage for how liberty would be interpreted later on.
Totally. And decades later, you see that impact in another huge case, Puttaswamy versus Union of India in 2017. That one was about the right to privacy.
Okay, but privacy, that seems kind of different from dissent. How that case build on that earlier dissent?
The Puttaswamy judgment, they actually referenced Justice Fazali's dissent, like acknowledging that the Gopalan case had been too narrow in how it saw liberty. That was a big shift, recognizing how important individual freedom is.
Wow. So the court was saying, hey, we might have gotten it wrong before, and this dissent helped us see that. That's powerful.
Yeah, Puttaswamy was a turning point. You see how legal thinking evolves and how dissent can actually shape how we interpret the Constitution.
All this talk about courts makes me wonder, though, is it all on them to protect dissent? Where does everyone else fit in?
That's where it gets tricky. The article really emphasizes that it's not just the court's job, every part of the government, civil society too. It's about building a culture that values these dissenting voices and protects them.
So like it's a shared responsibility. We all need to understand this constitutional ethic of valuing dissent, not just the legal experts.
Exactly. Everyone plays a part. This is where it gets really interesting, especially for anyone getting ready for the UPSC exams. Understanding how dissent works in India, like both legally and just in everyday life, that's super important for both the prelims and the mains exams.
Totally. The Gopalan and Puttaswamy cases, those are like textbook examples of how the court's thinking on liberty and dissent. That's changed over time. Definitely something UPSC folks need to know.
Yeah, and the article goes beyond just court cases, too. It digs into how tough it is to actually protect dissent, which ties right into the UPSC syllabus, Stuff like the role of the courts, balancing liberty and security, even this idea of creative constitutionalism.
Okay, creative constitutionalism. Sounds like judges get to be artistic with the Constitution. What does that really mean?
It's about judges not being stuck in a rigid way of interpreting the law. They got to think about the big picture, principles of justice, the spirit of the Constitution. This guy, Professor Upendra Baxi, he came up with the term. He said, judges should be actively interpreting laws so they promote fairness and protect fundamental rights.
So they're not just robots applying the law. They're using their understanding of what the Constitution is trying to do to make sure it still works,
Exactly. And this is especially important when we talk about dissent. Because even though we've seen some progress in recognizing how important dissent is, the article points out it's still being stifled in India.
Yeah, the article mentions activists like Umar Khalid, Sharjeel Imam Gulfisha Fatima. They were imprisoned for speaking out against the Citizenship Amendment Act. Those are pretty high-profile cases. What do they tell us about dissent in India today?
Those cases are a warning sign. They show this trend of using laws from the colonial era, laws meant for a completely different time, to shut down dissenting voices in modern India. Remember that quote from K.G. Kanabiran? He called the Gopalan judgment an Indian-made foreign judgment. That shows how stuck we are with these outdated legal approaches.
It's like we're still fighting the ghosts of colonialism, even 75 years after independence.
Yeah. It makes it super clear that the courts need to step up. They have to play a bigger role in protecting dissent.
So how can they actually do that? What tools do they have to make sure that right to dissent is real? Not just something we talk about, but actually protected.
One big way is promoting this creative constitutionalism we were talking about. It's like encouraging judges to go beyond just the technicalities of the law and think about the broader impact of their decisions, on fundamental rights, on the health of our democracy.
It's like what we were saying before about dissent as a constitutional ethic, interpreting the Constitution in a way that reflects its commitment to justice and liberty.
Exactly. It's about making sure the Constitution stays alive, adapting to the changing needs of society, but staying true to its core values.
Okay, I see how creative constitutionalism fits in. But what does it look like in action? How can judges actually use it to protect dissent?
There are a few ways. First, they got to be careful with laws that are written too broadly, like some anti-terror laws. Those can easily be misused to silence dissent. They need to interpret those laws narrowly. Focus on actual threats to national security, not just shutting down people who disagree.
So being really precise with how laws are interpreted, making sure the law is applied fairly, not as a weapon to silence dissent.
Exactly. Second, they got to tackle the misuse of preventive detention laws. These laws, like the one in the Gopalan case, they allow detention without trial, and they're often used to silence people. The courts have to make sure those laws are only used in extreme cases, when there's a real threat to public order.
So basically stricter safeguards against being detained for no good reason, making sure those laws aren't a shortcut to silencing dissent.
Precisely. And the article brings up another crucial point: delayed justice. A lot of times activists and dissenters are held in custody for a long time, even if they're eventually found not guilty. The process itself becomes the punishment, even if they're technically innocent.
That's awful. What can the courts do to stop that?
They need to prioritize cases that involve personal liberty, recognizing that justice delayed is often justice denied. Speed up hearings, grant bail more readily when it's appropriate, make sure the legal system itself doesn't become a tool of oppression.
It's not just about making big statements about how important dissent is. It's about making sure the legal system actually works that way, protecting people who speak truth to power.
Exactly, and that's where anyone studying for the UPSC, this is really important. The court's role in protecting those fundamental rights, especially the right to dissent that comes up all the time in the exam. You see it in questions about how the Indian government works, the separation of powers, how the Constitution is interpreted.
Makes me think about what you were saying earlier about the Constitution as a living document. What does that mean for dissent in India, like looking ahead?
It means the Constitution's not set in stone. It has to evolve, adapt to how society changes, how it's interpreted. It can't be frozen in time. It's got to respond to new challenges and how we understand rights and freedom.
So how does dissent help keep the Constitution alive then?
Dissent challenges the way things are. It pushes the boundaries, makes us rethink our assumptions. It makes sure the Constitution stays relevant and meets the needs of the people, not just some old relic from the past.
So dissent's actually essential for a democracy to stay healthy in the long run. It's not just about protecting individual rights. It's about making sure the whole system stays dynamic and can adapt to change.
Exactly. It's recognizing that disagreement and debate, those aren't threats to democracy. They're crucial. They make sure we don't get complacent, that we keep evaluating our values and systems, making sure they're serving the people they're supposed to protect.
This has been such an eye-opening deep dive. We've explored the history of dissent in India, the challenges it faces legally and socially, and the crucial role the courts play in protecting this constitutional ethic.
And for those preparing for the UPSC, remember, those nuances are key. But even beyond the exams, this knowledge helps you be informed and engaged citizens. You can analyze what's happening politically and legally and contribute to a more just and fair society.
If you want to learn more about dissent in the Indian Constitution, definitely check out the full article from The Hindu. It's got a ton of insights and analysis on this topic.
And always keep exploring these ideas, have those thought-provoking conversations, and stand up for the protection of those fundamental rights. Remember, the fight for dissent, it's never over. It needs vigilance, courage, a real commitment to justice and liberty.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And if you like this deep dive, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this episode with your friends. Until next time, stay curious and keep on diving deep.